August 15th, 1940. 10:30 in the morning. Biggin Hill, Kent, England. The scramble bell shattered the morning quiet. Flight Lieutenant Alan Deere sprinted across the grass toward his Spitfire, his boots pounding the summer earth as the Merlin engine roared to life. Around him, 11 other pilots of 603 Squadron raced to their aircraft. The morning sun glinted off the elliptical wings that would soon be pointed at the sky. Through his headset came the controller's voice, clipped and urgent. Bandits approaching Dover. Angels, 20, 100 plus. Deere's gloved hand pushed the throttle forward. The Spitfire leapt into the air, climbing toward 20,000 feet, where a formation of German bombers, escorted by Messerschmitt fighters, droned toward London. What the Luftwaffe pilots didn't know was that they were about to encounter a weapon system that would systematically destroy their confidence, their formations, and ultimately their entire strategic plan for conquering Britain. For months, German pilots had mocked the Spitfire's armament. 8 rifle-caliber machine guns seemed laughable compared to their cannon-armed Messerschmitts. The British were bringing pop guns to a knife fight. At least that's what Luftwaffe intelligence reported. What they couldn't calculate was the mathematics of convergence, the psychology of concentrated fire, or the devastating effectiveness of 8 streams of bullets meeting at a single point in space. The story of how British ingenuity turned perceived weakness into overwhelming strength begins not in the skies over Kent, but in a conference room 6 years earlier, where a teenage girl's calculations would help save Britain. July 19th, 1934. Air Ministry, London. Captain Charles Keith called the meeting to order. Around the table sat some of Britain's finest minds in aviation and armament. In the chair sat Air Commodore Arthur Tedder. The question before them was simple but urgent. What armament should Britain's next generation of fighters carry? The gathered officers knew what other nations were doing. The French were experimenting with 20mm cannon. The Germans had fitted cannon to their fighters during trials in Spain. The Americans were developing heavy machine guns. Britain was falling behind. Then Captain Frederick Hill stood to present his findings. A scientific officer with a gift for mathematics, Hill had spent months calculating firing solutions, closure rates, and hit probabilities. His assistant in these calculations had been his 16-year-old daughter, working through the maths on the family dining table. Hill's charts told a story that contradicted conventional wisdom. Fighter combat was changing. Aircraft were getting faster. Engagement times were shrinking. In modern air combat, a pilot might have only 2 seconds to fire before his target escaped. The solution wasn't bigger guns, it was more guns. Hill's calculations showed that 8 machine guns, each firing 1,000 rounds per minute, could put more metal into a target in those precious 2 seconds than any other armament combination. The weight of fire, not the size of individual projectiles, would determine victory. One officer objected. The .303 round had been designed for infantry rifles. Surely it was too small for modern aircraft. Hill shook his head. Not if you harmonize them properly. Set the convergence point at 400 yards. All 8 guns firing at a single spot. Nothing would survive that concentration of fire. The decision made that afternoon would shape the Battle of Britain. Britain would build fighters armed with 8 machine guns. The Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire would carry this armament into combat. History would prove Hill correct, though not in the way anyone expected. March 5th, 1936. Eastleigh Aerodrome, Southampton. Chief Test Pilot Joseph Summers climbed into the cockpit of a gleaming aircraft unlike anything he'd flown before. The Supermarine Company had built this prototype to answer the Air Ministry's demand for a modern fighter. Designer Reginald Mitchell had created something extraordinary. The wings were elliptical, a shape that provided the best lift-to-drag ratio possible. The fuselage was sleek and purposeful. The engine, A Rolls-Royce Merlin producing over 1,000 horsepower represented the cutting edge of British engineering. This was the Spitfire, though it didn't have a name yet. Summers advanced the throttle. The Merlin's roar filled the airfield. The Spitfire rolled forward, gathered speed, and lifted into the Hampshire sky. For 8 minutes, Summers put the aircraft through its paces. When he landed, he climbed from the cockpit and said 5 words that would become legend. "Don't touch anything." The prototype was perfect as it sat. By May 1938, production Spitfires were rolling off the Supermarine assembly lines. Each aircraft carried 8 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. The guns were widely spaced across the wingspan, a necessity of the thin wing design. German intelligence would later identify this as a critical weakness. They were wrong. August 4, 1938. RAF Duxford, Cambridgeshire. 19 Squadron received the first operational Spitfires. The pilots who gathered around the sleek fighters were experienced men, most with thousands of hours in biplanes. They were unprepared for what they were about to experience. Flying Officer Brian Lane strapped into his Spitfire for the first time and immediately noticed the difference. The cockpit was snug but comfortable. The canopy provided excellent visibility. The controls felt responsive, almost alive. When the Merlin started, the whole aircraft seemed eager to fly. On his first flight, Lane discovered what every Spitfire pilot would learn. This wasn't just an aeroplane, it was an extension of the pilot's will. The elliptical wings provided such responsive handling that thought became action without conscious effort. The aircraft turned when you thought about turning. It climbed when you willed it to climb. But the armament puzzled the pilots. 8 machine guns seemed excessive. More importantly, they were spread across 20 feet of wing. How could you possibly hit anything with such dispersed firepower? The answer came during gunnery practice. The ground crews set the gun harmonization to 400 yards, as Captain Hill had specified. When Lane fired his guns at a towed target, he watched 8 streams of tracer converge into a single point of fire. The target disintegrated. Still, 400 yards was too far for most pilots. You couldn't see your target well enough to aim accurately at that distance. The squadron armorers, listening to pilot complaints, made an unauthorized adjustment. They reset the harmonization to 250 yards. The effect was devastating. At that range, 8 machine guns firing simultaneously created a cone of destruction roughly 10 feet across. Anything caught in that cone didn't just take damage, it came apart. The widely spaced guns that German intelligence mocked created a pattern of fire that was impossible to evade at close range. But first, Britain would have to reach September 1939 without war. They failed. September 3, 1939. Britain declared war on Germany. At the start of hostilities, the Royal Air Force had 306 Spitfires. 187 were operational with fighter squadrons. The rest sat in storage hangars, waiting for pilots who hadn't been trained yet. Germany had over 1,000 single-seat fighters operational. The numbers looked grim. What the statistics didn't show was the quality of the aircraft. The Spitfire was faster than the Messerschmitt 109E at low altitude. It could turn tighter at all heights. And its armament, while unconventional, was about to prove itself in ways that would shock the Luftwaffe. October 16, 1939. Firth of Forth, Scotland. 9 Junkers 88 bombers droned toward British warships anchored in the Firth. The German crews expected an easy mission. British fighters, they'd been told, were slow and poorly armed. Spitfires from 602 and 603 squadrons climbed to intercept. Flight Lieutenant George Pinkerton spotted the formation first and called the attack. The Spitfires rolled into their attack runs from above. Pinkerton selected the lead bomber and opened fire at 300 yards. 8 streams of bullets converged on the Junkers. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The bomber's port engine exploded. The wing crumpled. The aircraft rolled inverted and plunged toward the sea. Flight Lieutenant Archie McKellar destroyed a second bomber. The remaining German aircraft scattered, their tight formation dissolved by the ferocity of the attack. The Spitfire had scored its first confirmed kills. But this was a skirmish. The real test was coming. July 10th, 1940. The English Channel. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, launched Operation Eagle Attack. The plan was simple. Destroy the Royal Air Force, gain air superiority, then invade Britain. Germany had 2,600 bombers and fighters. Britain had 900 fighters, split between Hurricanes and Spitfires. The mathematics looked impossible for the British. What the Germans didn't calculate was that they would be fighting over Britain, where every Spitfire lost could potentially be recovered, and every pilot could return to fight again. German pilots shot down over England became prisoners. Their aircraft became scrap. More importantly, the Germans misunderstood the weapon they faced. Luftwaffe intelligence reports dismissed the Spitfire's 8 machine guns as inadequate. Their fighters carried cannon. A single cannon shell could destroy a fighter. How could rifle-caliber bullets compete? The answer lay not in individual projectile power, but in the system as a whole. August 13th, 1940. Adlertag. Eagle Day. The Luftwaffe launched its main assault. 1,500 aircraft crossed the Channel in massive formations. German bomber crews, veterans of Poland and France, expected to smash the British airfields and break fighter command in a single day. They had not reckoned with Fighter Command's integrated defense system. British radar stations tracked the incoming raids from the moment they formed over France. Controllers vectored Spitfire and Hurricane squadrons to intercept, positioning them for maximum advantage. Squadron leader Sailor Malin led 242 Squadron into combat that afternoon. A South African serving with the RAF, Malin had developed his own tactical rules. Fight close, use the sun, save your ammunition for when you can't miss. His section climbed to 25,000 feet and waited. Below them, a formation of Dornier 17 bombers plodded toward their target, escorted by Messerschmitt fighters. Malin checked his gun sight, adjusted for 250 yards, and rolled into his attack. The key to effective gunnery was patience. Many pilots opened fire at 400 or 500 yards, wasting ammunition on shots that had little chance of hitting. Malin had trained his pilots differently. Get close. Really close. Close enough to see the rivets. He held his fire until the range closed to 300 yards, 250, 200. Then he pressed the button. 8 Browning machine guns roared to life. At 1,500 rounds per minute each, they created a storm of metal. In a 2-second burst, Malin's guns fired 240 bullets. The convergence point, carefully set by the squadron's armorers, brought all 8 streams together in a 10-foot circle. The Dornier flew into that circle. The effect was catastrophic. The aircraft's thin aluminum skin offered no resistance to armor-piercing rounds traveling at 2,000 feet per second. Bullets shredded the bomber's engines, punctured fuel tanks, and tore through control cables. Within 3 seconds of Malin opening fire, the Dornier was a falling wreck. The surviving crew managed to bail out. As they descended under their parachutes, they could see other bombers falling in flames. The tight German formations were dissolving under concentrated attacks from British fighters that seemed to be everywhere at once. This was the mathematics Captain Hill had calculated 6 years earlier. The Spitfire didn't need to carry explosive cannon shells. It didn't need to score a single catastrophic hit. It just needed to put enough bullets into a target to guarantee destruction. 8 machine guns, properly harmonized, firing for 2 seconds, achieved exactly that. But the German pilots weren't convinced yet. They'd been told the British were on the edge of collapse. Surely these early losses were temporary. August 15th, 1940. The largest air battle of the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe launched raids from Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and France simultaneously. They intended to overwhelm the British defenses through sheer numbers. Over 1,700 German sorties flew that day. The Luftwaffe expected to sweep aside the remnants of fighter command and bomb Britain into submission. What they encountered instead was a coordinated defense that made full use of every advantage Britain possessed. Radar provided early warning. Ground controllers positioned fighters to attack with height and sun advantage, and the Spitfire's 8 machine guns proved devastating against every target they engaged. Pilot Officer Eric Locke of 4-1 Squadron encountered a formation of Heinkel 111 bombers over Kent. The Heinkels were protected by self-sealing fuel tanks and armor plate. Luftwaffe crews believed their bombers could survive fighter attacks long enough to drop their bombs and escape. Locke attacked from the bomber's blind spot, slightly below and behind. At 200 yards, he opened fire. The 8 machine guns created a concentrated stream of bullets that overwhelmed the bomber's defenses. Armor plate could stop a few rounds. It couldn't stop 40 rounds arriving simultaneously. The Heinkel's starboard engine caught fire. Flames spread to the wing root. Locke held his fire, watching to confirm the kill. The Heinkel rolled slowly to the right and fell away, trailing smoke. 3 parachutes blossomed from the stricken aircraft. Locke selected another bomber and attacked again. Another 2-second burst. Another bomber falling. The German formation scattered, its protective box formation shattered by the intensity of British fighter attacks. By day's end, the Luftwaffe had lost 75 aircraft. Fighter command lost 34. More importantly, the Germans hadn't destroyed any critical infrastructure. The airfields they'd bombed were operational again within hours. The Spitfire squadrons had suffered losses, but replacement aircraft and pilots were already arriving from training units. The battle was becoming one of attrition, and Britain was winning. Major Werner Milders, one of Germany's top fighter aces, flew a captured Spitfire in late 1940. The Luftwaffe wanted to understand their adversary. Milders' report was sobering. The Spitfire is light on the controls, faultless in the turn, and has performance approaching that of our 109. But what impressed me most was its armament installation. 8 machine guns may seem inadequate compared to our cannon, but in practice, they're devastatingly effective. The British have solved a problem we didn't know existed. Their guns are harmonized to converge at close range, creating a concentration of fire that doesn't require precise aim. A pilot can fire with less accuracy and still score hits. Our cannon require exact aim. Miss by a few feet, and the shell passes harmlessly by. The British spray bullets. Some of them will always hit. Milders concluded his report with a statement that angered Hermann Göring. When asked what equipment would help the Luftwaffe achieve victory over Britain, Milders replied with bitter humor. "A squadron of Spitfires, Herr Reichsmarschall." The comment earned Milders a reprimand, but his fellow pilots understood what he meant. The Spitfire represented a complete weapon system designed for a specific, tactical problem. The 8 machine guns weren't a weakness. They were an optimization for the type of combat actually being fought. September 7th, 1940. The Luftwaffe changed tactics. Instead of attacking airfields, Göring ordered his bombers to target London. The intent was to draw up every remaining British fighter in a final, decisive battle. The Luftwaffe would destroy fighter command over the smoking ruins of Britain's capital. 300 bombers escorted by 600 fighters droned up the Thames estuary toward London. It was the largest formation yet assembled. German crews believed they would encounter only scattered resistance. They were wrong. Fighter command had used the previous weeks to rest squadrons, repair aircraft, and train replacement pilots. When the German formations approached London, they encountered nearly 300 British fighters rising to meet them. Squadron leader Douglas Bader led 5 squadrons from 12 Group in the famous Big Wing formation. 3 Hurricane squadrons and 2 Spitfire squadrons, 60 aircraft, flying in a stepped formation that stretched across miles of sky. The Germans had never seen anything like it. Bader assigned the Hurricanes to attack the bombers. The Spitfires would handle the fighter escort. He led his Spitfire squadrons in a climbing attack that brought them to 25,000 feet, 3,000 feet above the German fighter screen. The attack came from the sun. The Messerschmitt pilots never saw it coming. 15 Spitfires dove through the escort formation, their 8 machine guns firing in short, devastating bursts. The German formation dissolved into individual dogfights. Pilot Officer Geoffrey Wellham found himself in a turning fight with a Messerschmitt 109. The German pilot was good, using his aircraft's superior dive performance to break away from Wellham's pursuit. But the Spitfire could outturn anything in the sky. Every time the Messerschmitt tried to escape, Wellham's superior turning radius brought him back into firing position. The chase lasted perhaps 90 seconds. The Messerschmitt pilot made one final mistake, pulling up into a climb when he should have stayed in the dive. Wellham followed, closed to 200 yards and fired. The 8 machine guns hammered out 300 rounds in 2 seconds. The Messerschmitt shuddered under the impact. Smoke poured from its engine. The canopy flew off and the pilot bailed out, his parachute opening just before he dropped into the Thames. The fight over London raged for an hour. When it ended, the Luftwaffe had lost 41 aircraft. Fighter Command lost 28. More importantly, the bombers had scattered before reaching their targets. Those that did reach London dropped their bombs inaccurately. The damage was far less than the Germans had hoped. The Luftwaffe's daylight campaign was failing. The 8 machine guns that German intelligence had mocked were proving devastatingly effective. But some in the RAF wondered if they could do better. September 1940. Number 19 Squadron, RAF Duxford. 19th Squadron received something new. Spitfire Mark 1Bs, armed with 220mm Hispano cannon instead of the standard 8 machine guns. The cannon promised more destructive power. A single shell could destroy a bomber. Surely this was superior to multiple machine guns. The squadron took the cannon-armed Spitfires into combat with high hopes. Those hopes died within days. The cannon installation was unreliable. The guns frequently jammed after firing only a few rounds. Sometimes they didn't fire at all. Pilots found themselves attacking enemy bombers only to have their cannon fail, leaving them defenseless. Flight Lieutenant Brian Lane, now commanding 19th Squadron, filed repeated complaints. The cannon-armed Spitfires were useless. He wanted his 8-gun aircraft back. After several frustrating missions where pilots scored no kills because their cannon jammed, the Air Ministry agreed. 19th Squadron exchanged their cannon-armed Spitfires for conventional models. Squadron leader Douglas Bader flew both types and had strong opinions. "Give me 8 machine guns over cannon any day. The machine guns always work. They have enough ammunition for multiple attacks. And if you get close enough, they'll destroy anything you shoot at." Not everyone agreed. Squadron leader Robert Stanford Tuck advocated for cannon armament, arguing that the extra hitting power was worth the reliability problems. The debate raged through Fighter Command, with pilots split between those who valued the proven machine guns and those who wanted heavier armament. The statistics settled the argument. During the Battle of Britain, Spitfire squadrons armed with 8 machine guns shot down 529 enemy aircraft. Cannon-armed Spitfires scored only a handful of kills before the installation problems grounded them for modifications. The mathematics of war had spoken. The 8 machine guns worked. The cannon didn't. British industry focused on building more 8-gun Spitfires, not perfecting cannon installations that might prove superior in theory, but failed in practice. October 31st, 1940. The Battle of Britain officially ended. The Luftwaffe had lost 1,870 aircraft. Fighter Command lost 1,023. More importantly, Germany had failed to achieve air superiority. The invasion of Britain was indefinitely postponed. The Spitfire, armed with 8 allegedly inadequate machine guns, had helped save Britain. But the story of those 8 guns was far from over. The Spitfire's armament evolved as the war progressed. By 1941, improved cannon installations proved reliable enough for combat use. The Spitfire Mark 5B carried 2 20mm cannon and 4 machine guns. Later, Marks carried 4 cannon and no machine guns at all. The increased firepower was necessary as German bombers added more armor and German fighters became more dangerous. But even pilots who flew cannon-armed Spitfires acknowledged what the original 8-gun configuration had achieved. It had won the Battle of Britain. It had proven that concentrated fire from multiple weapons could be more effective than single powerful weapons that fired slowly. And it had validated Captain Hill's calculations made in a conference room 6 years before the battle. The mathematical principles remained constant. Hit probability multiplied by number of weapons, multiplied by rate of fire, equals total destructive power. The Spitfire's 8 machine guns optimized this equation for the combat conditions of 1940. Each gun firing 1,500 rounds per minute. 8 guns creating 12,000 rounds per minute combined. A 2-second burst, putting 400 bullets into a 10-foot circle at 250 yards. No bomber could survive that. No fighter could evade it. The seemingly inadequate rifle-caliber bullets, dismissed by German intelligence as pop guns, destroyed more Luftwaffe aircraft than any other weapon system during the Battle of Britain. December 1940. RAF Biggin Hill. Flight Lieutenant Alan Deere, who had scrambled in his Spitfire on that August morning 4 months earlier, was granted a week's leave. He'd flown 137 combat sorties. He'd shot down 11 confirmed enemy aircraft and damaged several others. He'd been shot down 3 times himself and walked away each time. Over dinner in London, a reporter asked him about the Spitfire's armament. Wasn't it true that the 8 machine guns were considered inadequate? Hadn't the Germans' cannon armament been superior? Deere laughed. The Germans thought our guns were weak. They were wrong. I've seen what 8 Brownings can do at close range. They don't just damage an aircraft, they destroy it. The German cannon were powerful, but they didn't fire fast enough. And if you missed with a cannon, you missed completely. Our machine guns put so many bullets in the air that something always hit. He paused, remembering specific engagements. The key was getting close, really close. Some pilots wasted ammunition shooting from 400 yards. I never fired unless I could see details of the enemy aircraft. 200 yards, maybe less. At that range, with 8 guns converging, you couldn't miss. The reporter scribbled notes. So the German assessment was completely wrong. Deere nodded. Completely. They judged our armament by the size of individual bullets. They should have judged it by the weight of fire. 8 guns firing simultaneously create a wall of lead. Fly into that wall, and you're finished. We proved it every day for 4 months. The post-war analysis confirmed what pilots like Deere knew from experience. The Spitfire's 8-gun armament had been perfectly optimized for the Battle of Britain. The widely spaced guns that German intelligence mocked created a pattern of fire that was nearly impossible to evade at close range. The allegedly inadequate rifle-caliber bullets proved devastating when concentrated by the hundreds. But perhaps most importantly, the system was reliable. In combat, reliability mattered more than theoretical power. The 8 Browning machine guns almost never jammed. They provided enough ammunition for multiple attacks, and they worked in the environmental conditions of combat, unlike the early cannon installations that failed under stress. Captain Frederick Hill's calculations, made in 1934 with his daughter's help, had proven prophetically accurate. 8 machine guns firing 1,000 rounds per minute each provided the optimal armament for fighter combat in 1940. The mathematics was elegant. The execution was flawless. The results saved Britain. August 15, 1985. RAF Duxford, Cambridgeshire. the RAF held a commemorative event for the 45th anniversary of the Battle of Britain's heaviest day. Veterans gathered at Duxford, where 19 Squadron had received the first operational Spitfires 47 years earlier, a restored Spitfire. Mark I performed a display, its elliptical wings catching the afternoon sun. Geoffrey Wellham, now in his 60s, watched the Spitfire climb and turn. He'd flown similar aircraft as a 19-year-old during the battle. He remembered every detail, the smell of cordite from the guns, the vibration through the airframe when all 8 machine guns fired, the satisfaction of watching an enemy aircraft fall after a successful attack. A young RAF pilot approached him. "Is it true the Germans thought our guns were inadequate?" Wellham smiled. "They did. Their intelligence reports said we couldn't penetrate armor with rifle-caliber bullets. They were half right. A single bullet couldn't. But 40 bullets arriving simultaneously could penetrate anything. We proved it every day." The young pilot watched the Spitfire complete a victory roll. "How did it feel to fly?" "Like nothing else," Wellham said. "The Spitfire was responsive, beautiful, and deadly. The 8 machine guns were part of that package. They weren't a weakness. They were a strength we exploited to the fullest. The Germans learned that the hard way." As the Spitfire landed and taxied back to the flight line, Wellham reflected on the lessons of the battle. Technology mattered, but not in the way people assumed. The side with the most advanced individual weapons didn't always win. The side with the best system, the best integration of technology and tactics, had the advantage. The Spitfire represented that integration. The aircraft's handling allowed pilots to get close. The gun harmonization concentrated fire at close range. The reliability ensured the system worked under combat stress. And the pilots, trained to fight within the system's parameters, exploited every advantage. The 8 machine guns that German pilots mocked in August 1940 became the sound they feared by October. The distinctive hammer of synchronized Brownings meant a Spitfire was behind you, firing. If you heard that sound, you had perhaps 2 seconds to evade before 400 bullets arrived. Many German pilots never heard the sound. They were dead before the noise reached them, their aircraft disintegrating under the concentrated fire of 8 machine guns that weren't supposed to be effective. The legacy of those guns extended far beyond the Battle of Britain. They established principles that guided armament design for decades. Weight of fire matters more than individual projectile size. Reliability trumps theoretical power. And a good system that works beats a perfect system that doesn't. Modern combat aircraft carry cannon, not machine guns. Technology has evolved, but the lessons learned in the skies over Britain in 1940 remain valid. The weapon system that wins isn't necessarily the one with the most impressive specifications. It's the one that actually works in combat, operated by trained crews who understand its strengths and limitations. The Spitfire's 8 machine guns weren't barely armed. They were perfectly armed for the battle they had to fight. Captain Hill's calculations, made in a conference room in 1934, proved correct in the most demanding test possible. Real combat against a determined enemy. The Germans mocked those guns. They called them pop guns, inadequate, barely worth the aluminum skin they were mounted in. Then the British turned those guns against them, and the mockery stopped. It stopped because 8 streams of bullets, converging at 250 yards, created a cone of destruction that no amount of pilot skill could evade. The Spitfire's real weapon wasn't the individual machine guns. It was the system that brought all 8 together at a single point in space where an enemy aircraft happened to be flying. The Germans never understood that until it was too late. By the time they realized their intelligence assessments were wrong, the Battle of Britain was over. Britain had won. The Spitfire had proven itself. And 8 machine guns, barely adequate according to Luftwaffe intelligence, had helped save the nation. The sound of those guns became the sound of victory, of survival, of a nation that refused to surrender even when the odds looked impossible. That sound echoed across the skies of Britain for 4 months in 1940. Every German pilot who heard it and survived remembered it for the rest of their lives. Many heard it only once. For them, it was the last sound they ever heard. The hammer of 8 synchronized Brownings, firing as one, sending 400 bullets toward a target that had nowhere to hide. The Spitfire's 8 guns weren't barely armed. They were precisely armed, optimally armed, lethally armed. The Germans learned that lesson the hard way, paid in blood and aluminum scattered across English fields. Their mockery turned to respect, then to fear, then to simple acknowledgement of an effective weapon wielded by skilled pilots fighting for their homeland. In the end, that's what mattered. Not the theoretical power of individual weapons, but the practical effectiveness of a complete system. The Spitfire had it. The Germans didn't. And that difference, multiplied across hundreds of engagements over 4 months, determined the outcome of the Battle of Britain. Britain survived. The Spitfire and its 8 allegedly inadequate machine guns helped ensure that survival. History records the victory. The veterans who flew those aircraft remember the sound of 8 machine guns saving their nation,